Hello and welcome to everybody. Thanks for joining us. I'm here today with Adekunle Oduye, who will be speaking at Fall Summit. And to get things started, Adekunle, what would be great is if you gave us an idea of kind of what was your journey to get to this point. Like some people have a background in design, some people have a background in computer science. I have a degree in history, so like, where did you come from, and how did you get to this point?
Yeah, great question. I'm happy to be here too. So how I got to this point, I study art all throughout elementary school through to college. Um, my goal was to be like, a painter, be like the next Basquiat where, I could sell paintings for millions of dollars and not have to like work. But I kind of had to make a transition because the business world of art is not as sustainable as it should be. And
Hmm.
so I kind of like I study studio art and economics. By the way, there's no relation between those two. I just kind of did what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And uh, I was mostly focusing on graphic design. Kind of wanted to do more of a like magazine design when I got out of school. And then I worked my first job and I basically did everything. I did brand design, I did graphic design, I did logo design, I did back end development, I did front end development. So I was like doing everything. And what was great about that experience was that I was able to figure out what I wanted to do and what I didn't want to do. Back end
Mm.
development, that was not what I wanted to do. So throughout my career, I've been like working in a lot in the intersection of between design and development. Spent time as a product designer. I had roles that was UX engineer, design technologist, and whatnot. So it's kind of like I found my niche where I'm like working a lot between those two different industries because I kind of am a designer, but I'm able to kind of code too. So
Mhm.
it's kind of like this space that I carved out for myself. So that's kind of how I end up here.
Yeah, cool. So you went to college for art then, or you?
Yeah, study studio art and economics.
Okay. Okay, so you actually in college you studied those, and then I see. Now I get it. Um, does the economics come into play at all these days, or was it just?
Well, I think it always because it's
Mhm.
kind of a way for you to really understand the world from more a macro level. I wanted to kind of
Okay.
balance out my career, my studies, where it's like I'm doing something that's more creative, and then there's something that's more analytical and whatnot. So that's kind of how I end up studying economics, but also I had pressure from my parents and siblings where it's like you should like do something else, and just in case if the art path doesn't work out.
Yeah. I, as a parent myself, I've been having similar conversations with my daughter. Yeah, I know what you want to. I know what you love to do, and I know what you want to do, and I think you should pursue it, but might want to have a backup. Yeah. So we have we haven't defined what that is yet, but she's not out of high school, so it's okay. Anyway, yeah. So well, I guess then you can always fall back on being an economist. Is that
Yeah, that's the
let's think
funny.
of yeah, let's think about that for a second. What's the funny thing though?
Well, people were asking me. I was like, oh, so I was asking when I was in college. I was like, what do people do with economics degree? And there wasn't a clear answer because I thought like, oh, you could be like a economist or whatever. But even that, I was like, what do they do? Uh, and they were like, oh well, make predictions and whatnot. And I was like, that doesn't seem like it's like tangible. Like it's
Mm,
like a needed thing everywhere, especially like if you're gonna work for government, sure, that'll be fine. But very few people are like working in like that like realm of like economic. Like I work for the government and I'm working on
mm,
policies and whatnot. So
mhm,
what other people do is that they actually work in finance because usually when you're doing a finance major you have to take economics, so people sometimes will be like, I'm studying economics but I'm going to go into finance
mhm.
later down the year or whatever like that. But um, I'm not a big fan of like I like learning, but like going to school for like 5 more years and racking up 100K in debt was like not my didn't follow like in my path. So that's kind of
Mhm.
where I'm like, you know what? I think this art and design path is right for me, but it's still helpful for me to kind of really understand what's going on in the world from the
Mhm.
economic point of view.
Yeah, no, that's cool. And I mean, fortunately, one can make a career out of being a designer and a designer developer, which I think brings us to, I mean, the topic of your talk, and you just published a book, which I'd like to hear more about design engineering. So give us an intro. I mean, design engineering, it sounds like it's straightforward, but I feel like there's probably more to it than just, oh, it's design plus engineering. So,
Yeah. So I think all throughout my career, uh, like I said, I was always interested in both.
mhm,
But what often happens where, talk to people like, well, you have to choose one or the other. But for me, I'm like, I'm stubborn. So I'm like, you know what? I think I could do both. Like, why not?
mhm,
Like what's stopping it? So uh I started like hanging around people that kind of did a similar things to kind of get advice about like how should I map out my career, like how should I approach like solving different problems and whatnot, and asked them, I was like, if it's even possible. And a lot of them were like, yeah, it's possible, but you're gonna have to like definitely work hard because you're trying to be good at two different things. Which was like, okay, that makes sense. But I also remember kind of like growing up, I'm the youngest of like seven. So like a lot of my siblings are like doctors and lawyers, and they tell
mhm,
me all like the challenges they go through and all the schooling and all the stuff they have to learn. So I kind of look at it from that standpoint where it's like they're like looking and learning a lot of things at once, and they have to be really good at multiple things, especially if you're a doctor. Like you have to be like sometimes have to be good at like internal medicine, and also be able to kind of diagnose like any skin conditions, whatever like that. So um again, like I kind of took that same process of like looking in a lens of like what are the things I must know from both from the design side and engineering standpoint, and then be very good at that. So I kind of like created myself like a box of like this is what I want to do, and then
mhm,
figure out how to do that in the best way possible. And the great thing about it is like I would say like 8 years ago, like it was rare to see like a designer, developer, or people always would consider us like unicorns, but now it's becoming more of a thing. And I think especially with like design systems being hot right now, it's definitely
mhm.
bringing a forefront, and it's more of a need now, especially if you work in a bigger and larger organization. So um, yeah, I think my journey has been pretty good. And also, I had the pleasure of working with Natalia Shelburne, Kim Williams, and Eddie Liu on the Design Engineering Handbook, which
Mhm.
kind of talks about everything from the process to kind of how design engineering fits within the organization.
And how does it fit within your organization? At least in a brief summary.
Yeah, so it's interesting because it's not one size fits all, but I always
Mhm,
kind of say that like depending on like how the company it fits in like within the company process. So if you're working in a company and there's like not much communication between design and engineering, you can kind of start like a design engineering discipline or whatnot, and kind of be the liaison between the design and engineer. So you can kind of talk both languages, which I think
mhm,
is the best thing. And I think
mhm,
there's multiple models you could use. There's like the the centralized model where it's like all the design engineers are working with like within one specific group and they're kind of doing their own thing. There's like the decentralized model where they're working embedded into like different squads, and then there's like the hybrid model, which is like a mix of both worlds. So usually I feel like 99% of like organizations can kind of adopt one of those models.
right. And so I take it. I haven't read the book yet. I'm hoping to soon, but sorry, I haven't read it yet. So I take it though the contention that you and your co-authors are making is that people who can speak both languages, who can bridge that gap and talk to both sides of that equation, are actually more valuable to the organization because they can reduce friction between the two camps, and help the designs be implemented more fully, and then also communicate back to the design sides like, oh, the engineers are saying that we have these limitations or whatever it is.
Yeah, that's correct.
Hmm.
I knew like when I was doing mostly design work, and then I'll come up with these interesting designs. I know one instance where I worked with the engineer. He was like, "Oh, that can't be done." I was like, "That's weird," because I was like, "Can't" is like a very strong word, and I feel like
Hmm.
anything is possible, especially with the web. Um, but once I kind of gone to like the engineering side, I saw that like it's not like it can't be done. It's like it will require more effort to kind of get it done. And kind of how I link, I'm able to kind of see from both lenses is kind of see like what's like viable, like what's like feasible from the timeline and the resources we have, but also figure out like, is this something we should be focusing on right now? Because I think the end goal is that people are really concerned about the product, the end product. So
Hmm.
if it's like not, if it's solving the people's like users needs and it's aligning with the business goals, then you it's kind of good enough. But then that comes in the later side of things where you can kind of iterate and make it better over time. And I think sometimes people get stuck in where it's like, oh, like it has to be pixel perfect. But I think never, like there's never a case where it's like going to be perfect. It's kind of like with anything in life, like you're never gonna, it's never going to be a perfect time to like work out. It's never going to be a perfect time to start, picking up a hobby. So it's something where you just have to like do it and just build momentum, and
Hmm.
you get to a place where it's like looking like, like a good polished product and whatnot.
Right. So suppose that someone comes to you and they're only on their one side or the other of this equation. They've only ever done design or they've only ever done engineering, but they're interested in bridging this gap. What would be your first sort of recommendation for first steps to them to become more of a hybrid design engineer type? And is that covered in the book? I kind of assume it is,
Um, I don't think it's covered in the book, but
but
it
okay.
is covered in the talks. So
Okay.
Um, but I could give you a little snippet of like how I would approach it.
Okay. Yeah.
So um, especially how I learn is basically, uh, if you think about design or engineer, there's a lot to learn. So
Hmm.
if I was in that shoes again, I would just kind of find someone, kind of like a co-champion from the other side. So if I'm a designer, I want to find someone that's on the engineering side of things that's interested in like design and whatnot.
Okay.
So we can literally exchange knowledge. So I could be like, hey, like this is like color theory, this is spacing, this is like line and whatnot, and they could be like, okay, this is like JavaScript, this is operators, these are like conditionals, and this is how you do things.
Mm.
Um, and I think the best way is like really figure out like what's the must knows for each of the disciplines. So if I'm a designer, I was like, I don't want to know everything. I just want to know enough that I can kind of get started. But
Mm.
as I time continues, I can kind of learn more and more concepts as I learn. But I want to kind of learn that foundation layer. So
Right.
figuring out like working with a co-champion from the other side of the discipline and figuring out like what are the foundation concepts I should understand in order to be effective uh, design engineer. I think that's a great place to start.
Okay. And then if let's say there's nobody on the other side of that fence who's interested in exchanging now, they're not interested in design. If you're designing, you're going over to engineering, or nobody in basically nobody on the other side is really interested in learning what you know. I would the move then be to just find someone over there who's willing to teach, if not necessarily to exchange? Say, hey, I'm really interested in what you guys do, and I might want to do it myself. Can you help me out with this?
Yeah, that's kind of how I learned. Where I had a bunch of mentors where they were like, I was like,
Mm.
uh, teach me, like I want to be better. These are the stuff I want to get good at. Tell me what I need to do, and I'll do whatever it takes. So that's kind of the approach I did.
Mm-hmm.
And I also asked for feedback. I was like, can you take a look at this? What are some things I can improve and whatnot? And I think that was like super beneficial to me because earlier in my career, I didn't have that guidance. So I was kind of like doing whatever it took to kind of get stuff done. But I was building the right thing, but I wasn't building it properly.
Mm.
And that kind of showed when it was time to scale. And I was like, it was like the code was very brittle and whatnot. So definitely
Mm.
having like mentors be able to kind of point me down the direction of like these are the things you need to learn, and just kind of like taking action was like kind of the way I learned.
Right.
And yeah.
Yeah. And one imagines that in a scenario like that, your mentor might be someone who's actually newer to work than you are. A lot of times we think of a mentor as somebody who's older, right? Who's has more experience, but that's not always the case anymore, right? Like sometimes your mentor could be you could in my case, I'm middle-aged, well, to be charitable. Um and if I were in a situation where let's say I'm a dev and I want to learn design, my mentor is probably going to end up being somebody in their 20s or 30s, but that's okay. The idea is to get the knowledge.
Yeah, actually, that actually happened to me where one of my first roles as a product designer. Like I said, I knew coding, but I never was coding within a team. And
Mm,
one of my mentors was like, she was still in college, and I think I was like probably like 5 years older than her. Uh,
okay.
but I think, like I said, that's for me. I was like, I don't care who I'm learning from. It could be an intern or it could be a high school student. I feel like you can learn anything from anyone. So
Right.
I kind of had that open mind where I was like, yeah, just tell me what I did wrong and like just kind of destroy, like basically just kind of tell me like everything. So, and I think for me, it was like I'm trying to get better as quickly as possible. And that's kind of like
Mm,
the direct route. And sometimes it's like people that are younger with you. So, and I feel like
yeah.
as I get older, it's going to be more and more like that. So,
Almost by necessity, but yeah, that's very cool. What else should we know about design engineering?
yeah. So another thing to know about design engineers, like not all design engineers are made equally.
Okay.
So you have design engineers that are more focused on the design side, and then we have design engineers that are focused on the engineering side. And if you split those out, those are like two different roles. So you have a design technologist, and then you have a UX engineer, UX UI engineer. And again, it's like they have very subtle differences, but how I kind of separate them out in a simple way is that like a design technologist focus mostly on prototyping, and they use code, they use paper prototype, they use interactive prototypes, but at the end, their end deliverable is going to be some sort of form like a coded prototype.
Okay.
And we have like UI UX engineers, and these are engineers that are able to like publish components using npm. They kind of uh,
Mm,
build like deployment and all this other stuff, and they focus mostly on like the production level of like code, making sure that it's performant, accessible, and scalable. um, and I would say those are like the two main groups. And people always ask like, I want to become a design engineer, but I'm more of a designer or I'm more of an engineer. I was like, well, there's you're able to fit in one of those two groups. I have the pleasure of like working in both of those like roles, and I think um, it's definitely cool to kind of be able to prototype or even like build like production level stuff, which is in the case if like you're working on design systems. So,
mhm.
but yeah, that's like one thing that I would say about design engineer that people always have questions about.
Cool. Okay. Um, I mean, we could talk for probably quite a while more, but I know you've probably got to get back to stuff. You're at Mailchimp, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, pretty cool. That's a good environment for design engineering, I take it.
Yeah, so it's in a case where I was brought in to do UX engineer. It's kind of funny. We were under design, but we kind of transitioned to engineering. But there's a case where we're gonna start having like a design technologist roles and whatnot. And I think we're starting to see the value of having those hybrids in both departments. So I think that's a
Mm,
good thing about it because if you pair like with a UX engineer with a design technologist, it makes it easy where there's no real handoff of like mock-ups and whatnot. Like it's just
mhm,
straight up like if I'm a design technologist, I'm building a prototype using like the design system, then the idea of like creating you taking that prototype and put it into the product is going to be super easy because I'm already using a lot of like the Lego pieces of like
mm.
the actual design system. So we were actually moving down that direction. And I think um, hopefully within like next year we'll have more design technologists and UX engineers working, because I think it's something that's pretty useful. And as we're working on more features and whatnot, we're going to need to be able to experiment very quickly. And I think that's where these design engineers come into play.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Well, thank you for joining us today. Where can people find you online?
Yeah, so you could find me at Akunle Oduir, LinkedIn, Twitter. I don't use Facebook or Instagram. So those two things. And then my site is adekunleoduir.com. Keep in mind, it's not updated. I'm currently updated, but
That's, I
everywhere else.
mean, that's true for all of our sites. Let's be honest. You're not
Yeah,
by any means alone in that. So
yeah. But yeah, that's where you could
cool.
find
So,
me. So yeah.
okay. So Adekunle Adoye and all the various things except Facebook and Instagram, which I hear you. Um, so very cool. Well, thanks for joining us, and to everyone who tuned in, thank you also for joining Adekunle and I. Hopefully, we'll see you at Fall Summit, and if you're interested in hearing more about that, head on over to anavenapart.com and check out Fall Summit, including our deal on 3-day tickets. So until next time, Adekunle, thanks very much.
It's been a pleasure.